Aloha, I am Rudolf, also known as Sila. Anyway, in this video, I wanna encourage everyone who perceives themselves as different or very unusual, too sensitive, or mentally perhaps unstable, very, well, outstanding in any way. Um, I want to encourage us all to be ourselves, to not judge these qualities or, well, personality traits, abilities, or even sensitivity in general, any aspect of our perception. Then we all have a different perspective, and this is what makes us so uniquely ourselves and how we create our reality with that. So anyway, for a long time I believed, I was very convinced that I had to adjust, or I had to acclimate myself or adapt to the rules of society in terms of behavior, or, well, partially social compatibility, but also being productive and functional in the expected way as I learned it. Though I understand more and more that what I chose as my traits are not necessarily strength or weaknesses, but it is what I chose, and it's not now for me to fight that, to choose differently in that. Of course, we can, but we have to examine our motivations for that. Um, because it is really a profound choice. And so, just being swayed by the opinions of others, I think, will do us rather more harm, and we will feel it or know it in ourselves when we actually fight our own intent, our own value fulfillment in this life, because that is what we chose ourselves to be, like we are. So I felt very different, and I don't necessarily recall my birth, but I always felt, growing up with my mother and my sister, my twin sister, I felt different and not necessarily always able to relate. And that didn't quite change when I met other people. In fact, I always tried to find someone who was as similar as myself, and probably we all do, but I had a lot of trouble doing that. I felt as if I only got to know some people and to understand they can't quite relate to what I'm experiencing, or they are perhaps only similar in some capacities to some degree. But overall, of course, we are all different, and some of us chose to be, well, outlying more in some standards, so to speak. It's of course not absolute. There is no average people, person, individual. No one is really at the center of any expectation or trend. Although you may find some people that seem to blend in quite well. They just do. Now, um, the reason that I felt different, or I concluded that I must be different, or there must be something wrong with me, was that I was able to perceive or partially hear voices. I got different kinds of input, and I realized certain things, and I felt around me, and nobody seemed to notice or be as astounded as I was. And so I figured the energies, that this is my, maybe it's my current conclusion, but I figured the energies that I was in contact with, they were not necessarily those individuals completely, or maybe even no one present. Anyhow, um, it seems now that I'm very sure that I built this awareness of other presences, also physically, like trees, the people in the plane or in the car or in some other village. It's a bit much sometimes. But I suppose I was long enough alone at the same time with the longing or the desire to actually interact. And I tried to figure out why I couldn't feel completely like myself, why sometimes I wasn't clear, why it felt sometimes as if I was interacting when actually there was no one around, or I wasn't speaking to anyone. But as you know, people can think of you, people can feel for you, and sometimes it's not even people. And sometimes we are interacting with collective energies, groups, pools, or movements that seem to be much bigger than just one individual. And so sometimes the background seems to be quite blurry, and that's what we need meditation for, basically, to choose our own vibration, to separate that, or at least differentiate that from ourselves. Anyway, I'm not sure how long I'm going to make this video, or if perhaps there will some follow. But I grew up, and there were some instances where I just knew something, I sensed something, and sometimes I followed the sensation, or I investigated. And sometimes these were impulses, sometimes impressions, sometimes it was something which I couldn't quite call voices, but I suppose some people translate these as voices, but I'm just used to interacting with them differently. Not necessarily translating them always accurately verbally in my head. But this is certainly a gift, and at some points I was leaded to other people who were similar sensitive, or they were having a breakdown, and they were seeking out their calm or their solitude or clarity. And I somehow found, for instance, this one girl when I was 4 or 5 years old, crying in the bathroom, and everyone else was outside having a pool party in the kindergarten. And I was somehow led to this, or I basically followed this inner hurt, and I'm not sure to this day if I was creating it or co-creating it, but I also didn't want to stay outside with all the people, and I don't know. Well, basically, there were many such moments, and today I know that every one of us is transmitting our energy, these vibrations, which thoughts, in a manner of speaking, are a component, just as feelings and everything else. So this is why we can just know and confirm to ourselves where other people are, what they are doing, how they maybe want to interact with us, or, well, you can also basically tell what game everyone is playing or how they are creating their reality and everything else. There's so much information there, and so this is what I'm learning to get along with that, to be intentional about what I'm doing. And I know, in strict medical terms, some people with similar traits are being treated as, or also labeled as, borderline or hypersensitive, or, well, yeah, any kind of abnormal behavior that they would think they are crazy because they're losing touch with objective reality, or what other people are doing, or what they're supposed to be doing. Well, I don't know all these labels, and I want to encourage to think outside of these boxes, to just see ourselves for who we are, for what we can do, and what we already choose to do. Because this listening ability, and this might be helpful to many of us, is actually kind of not the first move. It's like, I believe we are born with this, and we are used to listening, but sometimes I think I'm turning more of an ear to that side because I feel like I don't have the answers. So it's like I have this inquiry, this question, and so I listen, and ideally I can translate or be sure that I got an answer. But very often it's rather confusing, or I have to find clarity in objective actions. That might not be so much the case for everyone who has this leaning to listen or to hear voices or however you call it, but actually it's actually a transmitting and relaying of information per this energy, which is just our personal energy that we just emit all the time. But of course, not just people are doing it. Yeah, as you may tell, I'm doing it right now. So so this is basically the prompter that I'm reading. No, not quite. Um, what I want to say is also that we are not crazy, and it's important that we take care of ourselves, that we are gentle with ourselves, that we are accepting. And if you know someone who has such traits or any kind of different behavior that we may or that was labeled as abnormal, or they are struggling with accepting themselves, like try to accept your judgment of them and then accept them, or like move into acceptance anyhow. It's very important in this century more than ever, because otherwise we might lose some people, like literally, as we have, but more so than ever. It's important that we build our interconnectivity to integrate this knowing, this consideration of all of us being different and partially very different. Some people are not even quite physically there when you interact with them. Some people are, of course, in their thoughts or clinging to their feeling, which is basically related anyhow. Some people are not present because they are in the past or in the future. It's all quite the same, and some people just like to be in a certain state of ecstasy of knowing their essence, how higher power, their heaven, their God, staying with their ancestors. There are many such explanations, but they are not quite focused on what they are doing physically. Which, as I said, let's accept this, and I'm not saying that I'm like the best in accepting. That would be a joke in itself. But it is important that we play with that we learn to stabilize ourselves, that we ground ourselves, and if we need a space, a sanctuary away from all this energetic noise from people, then nature is there. Calm places may be created everywhere. I mean, I prefer nature, but someone else might be meditating in their own house or in the loudest noise they can find. Some people like to make themselves numb to it, and then they find clarity because they are forcing themselves to listen to some other communication. And it is the most important still to listen to yourself, to listen to intuition, which something tells me this video might be over. Aloha! I am Sila.